Hello, I'm Jamie Barker, and I'm a test rider for 29eronline.com, and recently just completed riding the Intense Spider 29er. I've had the bike for about the past 6 weeks, riding about 4 to 5 days a week. The bike is a great all-around bike. Felt very comfortable on it at all times. You know, it's a bike that you can pick up and ride all day or do, short technical rides. There was no true time when I felt uncomfortable on the bike. I was a little leery about full suspension and uphill climbing, but on this bike it's not an issue. Whether you're in the 4-inch travel mode or the 5-inch travel mode, both did very effectively. I didn't have to come out of the saddle in either mode in order to complete the climb. Whether it was a loose gravel climb, a hard dirt pack, or rolling boulders, whatever the case may be, it was fun to do. Comparable to a hardtail, it's there. I mean, that rear end it tracks accurately. It's a very comfortable suspension system to ride. Can't really say enough about that because I think it's one of its greatest attributes as well. Weaknesses, the one big thing that I did find in particular was I had a problem when I would downshift that the chain would actually catch between the rear linkage and the vicinity of the bottom bracket, so it would go over top of the chainstay, misrouting the chain. So you obviously have to stop in order to fix this. Now I did have this on numerous times to me. Probably in the 6 weeks, there was 2 days in particular. One day where it was terrible conditions. It was muddy out, so I initially had thought that was the problem, but further riding showed that it wasn't the case, because the next time it happened to me, it was a clear day, the bike was clean, the mud wasn't there, but it was the same conditions. It was uphill, slow RPMs going from big ring to middle ring to little ring, and then ultimately it being misrouted over the chainstay, and when it happens because you lose power immediately. That was the only real flaw that I found in the bike. Talk about differences in the travel modes. Tested both with a lot of time in both. Me personally, I prefer the 5-inch mode at both front and rear versus 4-inch mode. Tried a couple different combinations, both with 5-inch travel up front, 4-inch travel on the rear, 4-inch travel up front, 4-inch travel in the rear, 5-inch travel up front, 5-inch travel on the rear. The bike is effective in both ways, or whatever configuration that you set it up in. Me personally, I like the 5x5 because I can't really tell the difference in its efficiency, because again, with that amount of travel, I would have, I had a predetermined thought that I thought I would be less efficient. At the end of a climb, I was going to be tired because I thought, the sag wouldn't be there. I'd sag too much and I'd get a little bit of bob. Not the case. Not at all. It was, again, comfortable to ride, tracked well. When I did drop it down to a 4-inch travel fork and ran 4-inch travel in the back, wasn't as comfortable, just as responsive. I didn't blow through the travel. It still, it still did everything it was supposed to, but it just wasn't to my style of riding. At the end of the ride, I was a little bit more tired, and I don't know if it was because it's my riding style or if it was the bike. I would really lean more towards that it was my riding style. I'm just more comfortable and more confident on the 5-inch travel. With the mixed variant between 5 up front and 4 on the rear, didn't really notice the difference. I really didn't notice the difference until I was 4x4. 4 inches in front and rear. Again, the 4-inch travel, it felt like I was more of in a racer geometry. Like I was, it did change the geometry a little bit on the bike, or at least I felt that it did. My corners are a little bit more crisp, The bike was a little bit more responsive, but in that token, it was too responsive. It was, you know, it was too quick to respond, and I didn't like it as much. It shaved off a little bit of my confidence level, but again, this goes back to, you know, my riding style. Somebody that, you know, likes that racing geometry, they may like that. You know, they may feel comfortable on that, you know, at the end of a long ride, or if, you know, they want that as a race bike. You know, it is a comfortable bike to ride. One of the things that I did fail to mention earlier that I would like to talk about, one other weakness, and not really a weakness, but one of the things I felt with the bike itself, initial setup, in particular talking about the rear shock, it does become, it's finicky. The slightest adjustment on that rear shock can really change your sag substantially. Not so much in the 4-inch, or rather the 5-inch travel mode, but when you got down to the 4-inch travel mode, air pressure and set and sag is very difficult. You have to be very tedious when you're setting it up, in that, you know, it took a little extra care. You know, you couldn't blow off 3-4 pounds of pressure and think that you're going to be dialed in and have that 30% sag, which is suggested by the manufacturer, because that's not the case. The other thing that I would suggest is making sure you have all, you know, whatever gear you plan on riding when you're setting sag does make a difference. That was one of the problems that I had. When I did my first time ride on it, I didn't have all my gear on. My gear probably weighed about 10 pounds more, you know, than just my body weight. So when I set my sag up, I was like, all right, I'm great, I'm ready to go. I throw the gear on, I go out and I ride. The ride was not comfortable. 5 miles into the ride, and, you know, all of a sudden, you know, I'm finding myself exhausted because I'm bouncing a lot. You know, when we stopped to check the bike out, we noticed that my sag was off, and it was a good thing that we had, you know, a pump with us. Otherwise, you know, I would have had a miserable ride the remainder of the ride. But once we got that sag dialed in, then it's, you know, you got that sweet spot. You can go for days. You know, I mean, it's truly efficient, very comfortable.
Would you call it a plush bike?
I would call it a plush bike, but on the low end, because again, it's not, you know, it's not a, when I hear plush, I think all mountain, you know, something that's going to suck up a really big hit. I'm not an all mountain rider. I'm more of a cross country rider, but that bike is comfortable to my riding style and what I would like to do. You know, but it's a great all-around bike. Like, you know, I could see someone racing that bike, or I could see someone going out and doing a 30 or 40 mile ride on that bike. You know, non-racing, entry-level rider, and going out and having just as much fun as that racer. It is very supple. I would say supple is I guess that's the same thing, but I mean, it really takes up, you know, if you make a mistake, that bike will consume a lot of mistake for you. I mean, it really makes it made me a stronger rider, that I'm sure of.